Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back into Otram's YouTube channel. Today I'm doing an oil pump O-ring and front main seal on an 80 series Land Cruiser. We did this video maybe 6 years ago, but I realized I've come to do things a little bit differently, and we've got better camera setup and better lighting, so I figured I'd redo it so we have a cleaner video. But before we started, I wanted to give you guys the rundown of what you're going to need beforehand. So you're going to need a Toyota front main seal, and if that'll focus, get me out of the camera. There we go. Front main seal. We've gone to getting the screws for the oil pump cover because they're just about always stripped coming out now. The oil pump O-ring. And then, since you got to take them off anyway, we get the Toyota belts. This one's the alternator double set. And then this one's the AC compressor. And Toyota is about the cheapest place you'll find these. And you'll also need some way to hold the crank to keep it from spinning. This is a crank tool that I made eons ago, even before we sold the one that we sold for a long time. We stopped selling the crank tool a couple of years ago, but there's a guy in PA that took over. I think it's CPA Auto or something like that, but he's also on Etsy. So if you're looking for the crank tool, you can buy them on Etsy. I'll also try to remember to put the dimensions of this down in the info section below. And then you'll need a couple of 8mm bolts to bolt that to the crank. And I also wanted to go over a problem we're seeing crop up more often now. It used to be really cut and dry. If you had an oil leak at the front of the engine, it was either the front main seal or the oil pump cover. Unless it was the valve cover trickling down, but that was pretty obvious to see. And since you do both of them at the same time, you just killed two birds with one stone. You did the oil pump cover, you did the front crank seal. Lately, we're seeing more and more, so this is the front cover. Between the cover and the block, there's an O-ring that goes back here. We're seeing this O-ring start to fail more. And when it fails, it weeps out from behind the timing cover and kind of fills up this groove, kind of right up above where the tensioner pulley goes. And the easy way to tell, most of the time this groove, if you look at it down between it and the block, be covered up with grime. Like everything settles in here and it fills it up. If this is empty and it's got fresh, clean oil in it, that's a really good indicator that it's this O-ring that's leaking and not the oil pump cover or the front main seal. This is a lot bigger job to fix because to get to that O-ring, you have to take the timing cover off. To properly take the timing cover off, you got to take the head off and you got to take the oil pans off. So we usually do this engine out. You can actually see this in the timing chain video we did years ago. Just wanted to throw that out there. If you do the front main seal and the oil pump cover and it's still leaking, there's a chance it's this and not that you didn't get the O-ring in here right. Anyway, let me reposition the camera and we'll start draining the radiator to get started on the actual repair. Okay, so now we're up under the truck, kind of against the driver's side frame rail, and you'll see this white petcock, at least usually it's white. And this is for the radiator drain. And that won't open, so let me get my pliers. Hopefully I can get the pliers in here without hitting the camera. Oh, let me go grab a socket. Let's see if this works a little bit better. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so we've got our petcock open, and draining, I'm going to go up top and remove the radiator cap to get that to go a little faster. And then I'll reposition everything and we'll start working from the top side. Okay, so I've got the radiator drain down below closed. I've mopped up the huge mess that I made by missing the radiator. And I wanted to show you, I didn't show it when it was down below, but this is the little wrench that I ended up using to take the radiator loose. It came out of a CTA oil drain plug kit for doing like European cars. But this one adapter on it comes in real handy for doing the radiator drains on these. So normally when you go to pull the battery, there would be a battery hold down going across here with two 10mm nuts. This truck is missing that, so we're not going to take that off of this one. So we're going to start with just the negative post, and we're just going to loosen that up and pull that off and kind of tuck it over here to the side. And I like to save the battery terminal covers when we get new batteries just for doing this. That way that can't accidentally slide back and hit. And short, while I'm undoing the positive terminal, so go ahead and undo that guy. And somebody in the past has really hosed these battery terminals on this one and all the connections. We've actually got new cables coming from Toyota to try to fix that. So we'll stick that cover on there. There we go. And then over here against the fender, there's a 10mm headed bolt that holds the body negative on. I'm going to pop that out of there. I'm going to put that bolt back in the hole it came from. There we go. There we go. Normally, that is not that hard of a fit to get through there. And there's also normally rubber grommets in here. And it looks like there's only 2 bolts still holding this tray in. And these are just 12mm headed bolts. So here's the tray up out of there, and normally you'd have a bolt here, here, here at the front edge, and then 2 down here at the bottom. This one only had these 2, so I'll have to replace the others when I put it back in. Okay, so now that we've got the battery and the battery box out of the way, tuck this back out further. We can take off the radiator hose, which normally it would be a spring clamp, but somebody's put a worm gear on this one. So we'll loosen that up, slide that back. And then it still has its clamp down here at the bottom. And we'll dump some more coolant when we pull off the upper radiator hose. I guess I mopped a little bit too soon. And then we've got this steam vent hose that we're going to pull it off. And it's just 2 spring clamps. Actually, I'm not going to undo the back one because there's not really any need to. Just going to pull this off and then tuck it back here behind the distributor. In the original timing belt video, I took the radiator out. I've since changed the way we do things. I don't normally take the radiator out anymore unless I'm replacing it at the same time. So we're just going to take the shroud and the fan off. Not sure how I'm going to get a good angle on that. But anyway, there's 4 bolts holding the fan on. And we're going to take a long 12mm box end and slip it on there. and loosen these up. And somebody has boogered these nuts up, so I will be replacing these. I'm going to put it back together. And I like to do this with the belt still on because it keeps this from turning. Spin it around so I can do that last one. And these are all actually coming off fairly easily, except for how torn up the nuts are, so my wrench doesn't really fit on them. But sometimes you'll need to take a pry bar and wedge it behind these studs so that you can break these loose. Either a skinny pry bar or a flat blade screwdriver that's, got some heft to it. And of course, this last one's gonna fight me. Switch over and open it now that it's loose. Try to make that a little easier. Oh, and a word to the wise, move your drain pan before you start taking this off, because it never fails that every one of these bolts will drop and fall in your drain pan. Like that. So now the fan's loose and just kind of hanging in here. So we can take off these two bolts that are holding the shroud on. And then we can take the fan and the shroud out together. It wasn't on this one, but sometimes on the driver's side bottom of the shroud, the transmission cooler hoses will be clipped onto here. So just be careful of that. You may have to clip them off to get the shroud out. And another word of caution, and you may want to take the radiator out just to make this more safe. This little steam vent nipple is sticking out of the radiator now, unguarded, and it's a little plastic nipple. So you just want to be real careful that you don't hit that and break it off while you're in here doing everything else. So now that we've got the fan shroud and everything out of the way, we can start taking the belts off. And since we've taken the fan shroud off, it's easiest to just wiggle the water pump pulley off. And then you don't have to fight with the belts being in the way of undoing the adjustment pulley for the alternator. So I'm going to set this off to the side. And then in order to be able to get the alternator belts out, we need to take the AC compressor belt off. And there's a tensioner down here, kind of under the compressor and to the center line of the vehicle. We're going to loosen the nut on that. Don't take it all the way off. And then underneath, there's a 14 millimeter headed bolt that we're going to loosen up to run the adjuster in. And then once that's loose, we can take the alternator belt off, or the AC belt off rather, and then the alternator belts. And these were pretty bad, so they're getting replaced. We usually do the belts when we're doing this job. because they're almost always bad. So now that that's out of the way, we can move over to doing the crank pulley. In order to put the crank pulley holder on, we need to clean up these two bolt holes first. And I just like to take an 8mm by 125 tap. And thread that in there to make sure that we've got clean bolt holes so we can get a good grip with the holder tool. We get a lot of these in that are really crusty, and you'll sit there fighting trying to get the crank tool on. And that one's going to fight me, so I'm going to turn the engine over a little bit. I've also seen people take the starter out and put a deep socket on one of the flex plate bolts and try to hold the crank pulley that way. And I've seen where people have bent the flex plate doing that, so I do not advise that at all. And then I want to get this to where it's in the right position for me to put my holding tool on. And you want to only really turn this in the clockwise direction, otherwise you can make the chain skip. There we go, that'll get it. I just stuck a screwdriver in a bolt hole to keep my crank tool handle from sliding down. And sometimes these can be a real bear to get off. I used a 6-point socket to try to break it loose. I'm going to move to a 12-point so I can get a better angle on it. And this is a 30mm socket, by the way. There we go, it's coming. It's just really tight. And I like to use a breaker bar for this instead of a ratchet because I have broken way too many ratchets doing this. There we go. Now it's free. Now we can take the big pulley or the big bolt out of here. And before I do this, usually I will clean up under here with a wire brush and brake clean to get everything that might be loose and fall down off of here. Somebody's already power washed this, so don't need to do that. But normally you would want to get all the dirt and grime off first, so you don't drop it into the engine. Then you just pull the pulley off. And you want to look at the seat here. There's a little bit of a groove started in this one, but it's not too bad. If it's a really bad groove, you either want to get a new pulley, which is wicked expensive, or get a speedy sleeve that slides over this to cover up the groove. Somebody's been in here recently because that feels like a fresh seal. We'll just take our seal puller, pull the seal out, and then once I've got the seal out, I like to take some paper towel and stuff it in here just to keep anything from falling in while we're doing the front cover. And now we can start doing the front cover, which normally right here there would be an idler pulley. For some reason it's been removed on this truck, and there's this weird 16 millimeter headed bolt. So we're going to take that out of there. And I will probably replace this with a JIS bolt because I don't like wrong size wrench heads. And then we're going to use a number 3 JIS screwdriver bit. It's very important that it's a JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard screwdriver bit. An American number 3 Phillips will strip these. And we're also going to put it in, and we're going to tap it in to make sure it's really well seated. And then I really like this Milwaukee right angle impact for this job. Because it does a good job of getting these bolts out without stripping them. If you take the radiator out, you'll have more room to get a regular impact in. But since I got this right angle, I don't really take the radiators out that often anymore. And it really looks like somebody may have just done this job, because these screws are very clean and very fresh looking, and they're coming out very easy. It's going to be interesting to see what the O-ring looks like. Yeah, this had to have just been done. And almost slid off my step stool. There we go. And that's all of our bolts out. And you're going to lose some oil when that comes off. Yeah, that's a fresh O-ring. Yeah, that's a fresh O-ring. Normally they're super hard and brittle and shatter when you take them out. I don't see any pinched. I take that back. And you're probably not going to be able to see it. But right here in that corner, it's pinched. So yeah, it looks like somebody just did this, but pinched the O-ring when it went back together, which is fairly common if you don't use like grease or something to hold this in the groove while you're putting it back together, which I don't see any signs of grease in there. So that's likely what happened. So anyway, I'm gonna clean everything up and then I'll bring you back for reassembly. Okay, now that we've got everything cleaned up, we can start putting it back together. To get the O-ring to stay in its groove, I like to use this transmission assembly goo. It's just like a thick, tacky grease. And you can just kind of put a few wads of it in the groove as you go around the pulley, or not the pulley, is the O-ring groove, as you go around the pump. And this stuff's really tacky, so it'll help the O-ring not slip out and not get pinched. And then it's oil soluble, so as the engine warms up, anything in there just kind of mixes into the oil. And we can get the new O-ring. Come on. And then I'll get it, stuck in roughly in the groove. And then I'll come back and run my finger around it. To make sure that it's in the groove, and then also you can kind of squish the assembly grease around and it'll give it a more firm hold. So they were in there well. And even though those were new-ish looking screws that I just took out, I'm going to replace them because they're cheap and it's good insurance. And then you just want to make sure as you're putting the pump in that, the O-ring doesn't come out, doesn't get pinched. And I like to go crisscross like this to, again, keep me from pinching it or loading it funky while I'm putting the screws in. And you can kind of tell as you're putting the screws in, if it keeps an even gap all the way around, then you're, pretty sure that you've got the O-ring still in there straight. If it comes out of the groove, you'll see a wider gap at one portion than another, usually. And then in my original video, I said I didn't know what the torque on these was because I couldn't find it in the manual. And another viewer commented on that video and said that they had found it and it was supposed to be 8 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque these to 8 foot-pounds. I'm going to go kind of crisscross until we torque this down evenly. And then I always like to go around again, just to make sure I've hit all of them. There we go. Somebody's rethreaded that for a German bolt instead of a Japanese bolt. And since I don't have a new German bolt, we're going to put this one back in. Now we can move over here to doing the front crank seal. We just want to make sure there's no burrs or nicks or anything in that seal bore. And you also want to make sure that your keyway is still in there because that is apt to fall out on occasion. So I've got my new front seal, which not sure what was going on with the one we took out because it was black and all the Toyota ones are brown. But I'm going to put a coat of assembly lube on the inside lip so we don't have any friction when we're starting it up and before oil gets up to it. And then I'm going to take a little bit of sealer and run it around the outside just to give us a little lubrication to make it easier to slide in, but also it gives us a little extra insurance that we don't get any leaks around the outside edge. And then we'll see how much of a mess I can make sticking that guy in there. And I like to get it just started by hand. And then I'll just take a short 3/8 extension and pop it back out. Sometimes these go in nice, and sometimes they fight you. And today, this one wants to fight. And they make various seal installers that can make this easier to do, but half the time they drive the seal in crooked and you can't see it going crooked, and then you end up ruining the seal. Although this one just does not want to cooperate, so I'm going to go get a seal driver. And this is the OTC seal installer kit, and it sucks on this seal because of the lip, and they don't have a driver cup that's big enough for this seal lip to fit in easily. So you got to sit there and tuck the lip in. And that's where I was saying, even these will try to drive the seal in crooked. The idea behind these is that the bolt's perpendicular to the crank, so it should hold everything square as you're going together. But it never really wants to work that way in practice. It's a little bit off at the bottom. Now we can take our crank pulley, wipe it down real well, and stick it on, and you'll want to feel around to see where your keyway is. Mine's facing pretty much straight down. You don't want to just sit there and whale the crank pulley against that keyway trying to get it to seat, because if you knock the keyway loose, it falls down inside the timing cover and it is not fun to get back out. And then I'm going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the threads and a little bit under the bolt head so we get a good smooth torque When we put this back together, I gotta rotate the pulley around so that my holder is facing the other way now. That should do to begin. Holder all in there, and you just want to watch out. You've got a bunch of brake lines on this side that it's going to want to crunch. And then we're going to get our giant torque wrench. And we're going to tighten this up to 306 foot-pounds. And I like to click that a few times just to make sure we're good. And I should have threaded the holder bolts in a little bit better. I left them hanging too far out and I broke one of them. But let me get this all reset and I'll bring you back around to finish up. So now that we've got the crank pulley torqued on, we can get to putting the belts back on. And I find it easiest to put the water pump pulley on and then just hold it loosely with two nuts. And then down here, kind of hidden behind the hoses and also hidden behind the belts when they're on there, is a 12 that we need to loosen up, and it's already loose. Makes our job easier. And that's our adjustment slide. And then on the end here, there is a bolt. Somebody has routed these hoses all wonky. There's a bolt here on the end that we're gonna loosen up. And sometimes it's easier just to grab it by the other end and spin it, because you've got to go pretty far. You can also snake an extension out above the power steering box and get to it that way. I'm actually going to see if I can get a little electric ratchet in there. Sometimes when people redo the power steering hoses, they get them in here at a strange angle, and it blocks access to this. There we go. Just slide the alternator all the way in like that. Then we can take our alternator belts and I need to loosen that up just a little bit more. Come on. Go. There we go, and there's one on. The back one's the trickiest one to get on because you got to jump it over all the pulleys in front. And then we'll tighten up that 12 millimeter. Till we got good tension on the bolt or belts. And then we'll take a 12 millimeter open end wrench and slip it behind the belt to tighten up that lower adjuster. And I'm wondering if this isn't stripped, and that's why it was already loose. Oh, nope, there we go. It's just really far out. So I'll snug that guy, and then we can come in here and retighten that top alternator bolt. There we go. And now that set of belts is all tightened and good. We can put our alternator belt on. And I'm going to go underneath and snug that up. There we go. And we'll tighten up the lock bolt on the adjuster. Make sure you tighten this bolt, or this nut rather. Back when I was in high school, I left that nut loose on my 4Runner, and the whole pulley assembly, everything fell off. And it was not a good day. So now that all that's tight, we can take these two nuts that we put on the fan pulley temporarily off. And the fan pulley is going to pull a little bit crooked when you do this. It'll straighten back up when we put the clutch back on. But it's way easier to adjust this before you've put the shroud and the fan bracket back in, or the fan back in rather. And then we're just going to take our fan and our fan shroud, and we're going to put those the right way around, like so. We're going to feed them in together, and then there's little locking feet that the shroud sits on at the bottom. You may have to do a little dance to get those to line up. There we go. And then we'll loosely start our fan so that it's not bouncing around in there. Go ahead ahead and put these 2 Shroud bolts in. And you just want to look down the side of the Shroud to make sure it's seated. Snug those up. You want to be kind of gentle with these because it's a plastic Shroud going into a plastic radiator. And then we can start tightening up our fan clutch bolts. And you want to kind of go back and forth as you're tightening these because the way the belts are pulling that back pulley crooked, because they're already tensioned, it's gonna want to make this go on crooked on the spud. And if you don't alternate back and forth, you can get it bound up. And then it's a pain to get back loose to try again. And I do not like the aftermarket fan clutch that's on here. There's not enough room to get a wrench on these nuts. And as I'm tightening them, I'm just watching the amount of stud that's sticking through the end of my nut so I can kind of keep an eye on whether or not I'm going on straight. With the first 3 in there, we can then put a wrench on the crank and spin it around so we can get to the 4th one. A lot of times, especially if the engine's pretty old, there's not enough compression to hold against you tightening these nuts up. And as you get them snug, they'll spin over on their own. This is a pretty low miles engine, it seems like. And it's making it easy, or making it too stiff to spin over. Okay, and now all of our fan bolts are tight. So we can go ahead and bring our steam pipe back and stick it on. Put our clamp back. And you know what? This hose is really squishy. I'm gonna replace this radiator hose and not put this one back on because I don't like the feel of it. But anyway, from here, you would just put the battery box back in, pressure test the cooling system, and refill it. And I just put up a video recently on how we pressure test and burp cooling systems. If you wanted to check that out, I'll try to put it up in the corner. But yeah, that's changing the front crank seal and oil pump cover O-ring on a 1FZ-FE 80 Series Land Cruiser. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in.